Hello and welcome to Unacademy. As 2025 comes to an end, it is very important to discuss one of the shocking events in South Asian geopolitics, the ongoing chaos in Bangladesh. How does it affect India? And we need to understand the root cause of what's happening in Bangladesh and where India lost the plot. We should also discuss how India can get back into the game and what is India's strategy going forward to protect our interests vis a vis Bangladesh. As all of you know, Bangladesh is witnessing a very chaotic, turbulent period in its political history. Over the last 1.5 years, the country has not only witnessed a revolution, a overthrowing of the former regime under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, but it has also unleashed radical extremist forces who have been targeting the minorities, particularly minority Hindus. There are very strong prevalent anti India sentiments, and as a result, the developments in Bangladesh become extremely concerning from India's perspective. So, in this session today, all the IAS aspirants and anybody interested in geopolitics, they must pay attention to this discussion in order to understand the entire political history of Bangladesh, which will help explaining the current ongoing events. So, in this session, we will be discussing some important landmark events in the history of Bangladesh, going all the way back to 1947. We will talk about the location and the importance of Bangladesh for India. We will discuss when Bangladesh was part of East Pakistan and the events that led to the liberation of Bangladesh war, where India played a pivotal role in the conflict to help liberate the country. We will discuss the events post liberation and how we saw the emergence of hostile regimes, and how, under Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League, India had a trusted friend and partner. We will also evaluate the recent events and developments, the fall of Sheikh Hasina's regime, and the emerging threats. So, this is going to be a short but in depth and detailed discussion. So, before we start, I have a very important announcement. As we are marking the end of the year, Unacademy is providing you a great offer to enroll for our IAS courses. This special offer ends tonight, and if you enroll within the offer period, you will get a 55% off on all our courses, along with double validity, which means if you buy a 6 month subscription, you get 6 month additional subscription free. Same for 9 months, 12 months, and 18 months. And you also get CSE Assure. For some reason, if you don't clear the exam, the next attempt is completely on us, where you will get a free subscription in order to ensure that you prepare for the next attempt. So, those interested, please click on the link provided in the description and don't forget to enter the code IAS English. So, with this, let's get started with our discussion and let's look at the location of Bangladesh. Where exactly is the country located? Why is it strategically important for India? See, amongst all the neighbors that we have in South Asia, Bangladesh is one of the most important neighbors, primarily because India shares its longest land border with Bangladesh. This land border stretches close to 4,096 kilometers. And we also share an extensive maritime border in the strategic Bay of Bengal. So, because of this reason, Bangladesh becomes extremely critical for India. Now, look at the states sharing the borders with the country: West Bengal, Assam, Meghalaya, and as well as Tripura and Mizoram. The developments in Bangladesh, they tend to have a spillover effect, and especially the border security along this sensitive border has always been having an impact on India's internal security as well. This border is known to be highly porous because of the natural gaps that are present. Because of the complex terrain and topography, there are natural gaps which make the border highly porous. We have around 54 transboundary rivers that cut across this boundary, creating a riverine network and wetland systems. Then, towards northeast India, towards Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram, you have mountainous regions and densely forested areas which are very remote and not connected with good infrastructure. So, the remoteness of the region and the presence of the hilly terrain with dense forests creates many gaps in the border, which is exploited by organized criminals, which has been exploited by drug traffickers, arms traffickers. It has been a route for human trafficking as well. It has been a route for the entry of illegal migrants into India. And the problem of illegal migration from Bangladesh has had a big impact on India, particularly in the Northeast. The huge influx of illegal migrants into the Northeast has led to demographic changes, which has contributed to socio ethnic tensions between the illegal migrants and the native communities. It has even become the root cause for several Northeast insurgencies, including the insurgency of Ulfa and the insurgency seen in Tripura. So, the overall stability of Northeast India is directly linked to what happens in this country. Apart from organized crime and as well as human trafficking and illegal migration, Bangladesh has also been a safe haven for several insurgent groups and terrorist organizations, especially Pakistan, which has had influence in Bangladesh. And when we had hostile governments in Bangladesh, they have given shelter to not only criminal cartels, which are involved in drugs and arms smuggling, but they've also sheltered insurgents and terror groups that operate against India. So, terror organizations like Huji, Lashkar-e-Toiba, and even Al Qaeda and ISIS of late have found a presence in the country. Then Northeast insurgent groups like ULFA, NSCN, and the Mizo National Front at one point, then even the Bodo insurgents, they've all found a safe haven as they can easily access arms supplies, raise funds for their operations, and get sponsorship and support from state agencies, including Pakistan's ISI. So, because of this, this border becomes very sensitive, very delicate for India. And of late, China, which has become closer to Bangladesh, has made some big investments in the country, which poses a strategic and economic challenge and a security challenge for India. Now, when you look at these maps, it becomes very clear that the fate of the two countries, they are bound together by the geography of this region. Look at the rivers that are shared between the two countries. For example, the Ganga becomes the Padma as it enters Bangladesh. The Brahmaputra becomes the Jamuna as it flows into Bangladesh. Then we have other important rivers like the Tista that flows down from Sikkim through the Siliguri corridor into Bangladesh. Then from northeast India, we have important rivers like the Barak and the Feni. Eventually, these river systems merge to form the Meghna river system that drains into Bay of Bengal. So there are common shared ecosystems as well. The Sundarbans wetland ecosystem is a shared heritage between India and Bangladesh. The people on both the sides are historically linked. There is a civilizational cultural bond that unites us. So, as a result, Bangladesh is very crucial. Even as a trade partner, when relations were good between India and Bangladesh, we enjoyed a very good trade relationship, and Bangladesh was the largest trading partner for India in South Asia. Compared to all the other neighbors, India had the best trade partnership with this country. So, it's because of these economic, cultural, strategic, and military reasons that Bangladesh becomes very, very critical for India. But to understand this entire story, to understand what's happening today, you need to identify the root cause of this conflict. It goes all the way back to colonial India and 1947 and the horrors of partition. This is where the seeds of divide was sown between the people of this region. The then Bengal province, as you know, was partitioned and it would become part of East Pakistan. And in East Pakistan, the native Bengali community, which takes a lot of pride in its identity and culture, was oppressed and discriminated by West Pakistan and the Punjabi elite of West Pakistan. So, post independence, Bangladesh or then East Pakistan had a very troubled history. It all started with the economic discrimination that was seen against the Bengalis as a result of West Pakistan domination by the Punjabi elites. Now, when you look at Pakistan's politics and society, post 1947, be it under Jinnah or under the later military dictators who came up, Pakistan has always been dominated by the Punjabi elites, be it in the politics, in the military, within the ISI. Even today, if you look at Pakistan, the Punjabi domination is very evident. So, this was a clash of identities, a clash of two cultures. So, the Punjabi domination and oppression against the Bengalis became the primary root cause that led to resentment amongst the Bengali community within East Pakistan. See, I'm sure you would know the Bengal province played a pivotal role in our freedom movement during the colonial times. The Bengal region was seen as a very progressive region, a home of revolutionaries and freedom fighters and intellectuals. So, here, more than religion, what bound the people together was the cultural, linguistic, ethnic identity of the Bengalis, be it Bengali Hindus, Bengali Muslims, or even the other communities found here, from Buddhists to Christians. They were all united by one larger identity, which is the Bengali identity. And after independence in East Pakistan, the Bengalis felt that they were being economically discriminated at the hands of the Punjabi elites from West Pakistan. Now, take for example the textile industry. Before independence, the East Pakistan region had many more textile industries and factories compared to West Pakistan. East Pakistan was making a bigger contribution to the Pakistani economy, and yet it got lesser financial allocation. So, post independence, all the financial resources were cornered by the West Pakistan elite. In fact, West Pakistan got more industries and factories in the textile sector, and this was at the cost of discrimination against the Bengalis in East Pakistan. So, the Bengalis eventually felt that being part of Pakistan was against their interests, that they were being economically suppressed, though they accounted for a larger percentage of the population and played a significant role in the Pakistani economy back then. Still, they were not getting fair treatment and equitable allocation of resources. And this became one of the primary points of division. Then came up deliberate attempts with the Pakistani state to crush the identity of the Bengalis, to oppress the language as well. So these factors, the economic, cultural, linguistic factors, would sow the divisions between West Pakistan and East Pakistan. In fact, Muhammad Ali Jinnah would even push for linguistic discrimination and try to impose the Urdu language on the Bengali population. You can see through this clip how the Bengali identity was larger than religious identity, how it was a unifying identity in East Pakistan, and how West Pakistan tried to crush this unifying identity by imposing the Urdu language on the Bengalis. So this was obviously met with a lot of resistance. In 1952, the student leaders, they rebelled against the Urdu imposition, which was primarily a project of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And a large movement was carried out, a linguistic movement, to protest and take a step against the Urdu imposition, which would crush the Bengali identity. But eventually, Pakistan used brutal force to crush these protests, and large scale killings were carried out. In fact, this day, the 21st of February, on which Pakistan committed these atrocities against the Bengali protesters who were fighting for their language, their identity. This day is still celebrated in Bangladesh as the Martyrs' Day. In fact, it is also recognized by the United Nations as the International Day for Mother Language, because this was a fight by the native people for their mother language, for their identity, which is tied to the language that they speak. And it's in this context that a young Sheikh Mujibur Rahman would rise up as a leader, becoming the top leader of the East Pakistan Muslim League, and eventually would establish the Awami League to give a voice to the Bengali population, which was being suppressed by West Pakistan. So, this was a very interesting phase in the internal politics of Pakistan. So, as West Pakistan tried to crush and erase the identity of the Bengalis, there was a stronger reaction coming from East Pakistan, where Bengalis tried asserting themselves. And Sheikh Mujibur Rahman would become the face of this struggle. With the Awami League, this party would very quickly become the representative of the Bengali identity. And throughout 1960s and the early part of 1970s, till the country was liberated, Awami League would take upon itself to fight for the rights of the Bengali community. So it's in this context that we need to understand as to what happened in 1970-71 and what led India to get involved in the eventual conflict that broke out in East Pakistan. So as I said, Bengalis were constantly facing discrimination and oppression. There was targeted violence against the community as well. There was an attempt to impose a homogeneous identity on East Pakistan. So when this was met with resistance, Pakistan would try to crush it with brutal force. So back then, Pakistan had struggled with its democracy experiment. Pakistan was never a true democracy. Very soon it had come under military rule. And until 1970, Pakistan had not held its first democratic, free, and fair election. So when the first elections were held in 1970, following this systematic neglect, In this election, the Awami League delivered a shocking result under Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Because, see, the Bengalis were frustrated with the mistreatment and the discrimination. In fact, there was one deadly cyclone back then, the Bola cyclone, which had caused widespread destruction in East Pakistan. But West Pakistan did not show enough care, enough interest to help out the Bengalis who were struggling following the impact of this disaster. So all these events had contributed one by one. So when the 1970 election was finally held, the Awami League under Sheikh Mujibur Rahman clearly had the popular mandate. So in the Pakistani assembly, the Awami League would rise up and secure majority of the seats. And to be fair, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman should have become the leader of Pakistan at that point, with Awami League forming the government, given the fact that they had won the majority of the seats with a clear landslide victory in East Pakistan. But the then West Pakistani leaders under the military dictator Yahya Khan and the political contestant Zulfikar Ali Bhutto from the Pakistan People's Party, they would collude together to derail the election result. They would even get Sheikh Mujibur Rahman arrested to prevent him from taking power. And they tried to even make a compromise to work out sort of a power sharing arrangement between Bhutto and Mujibur Rahman. But this was rejected by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and the Awami League. Obviously, because the party had got a clear mandate to form the government, and undemocratic methods were being used by Yahya Khan and Bhutto to derail the mandate of the people. So Sheikh Mujibur Rahman declared an outright liberation struggle, and Awami League would provide the face and bring the Bengalis together to fight for their rights. And this is how the liberation movement started out. So, as the liberation movement began, Pakistan used brutal force to try and crush the movement. So, in this regard, the one day that you should remember, a horrific day in the history of South Asia, is the 24th and 25th of March. On the intervening night of 24th, 25th March 1971, Pakistani army launched Operation Searchlight, a deadly operation aimed at targeting the Bengali freedom fighters. Students, intellectuals, even women and children were targeted. Mass killings were carried out, and this was nothing short of a genocide that Pakistan was committing against its own people. So, following this, the Bengali resistance became even more stronger, and it triggered a huge refugee crisis, and India had to deal with the entire burden of this. So, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and the Awami League would lead the political phase of the struggle by forming the Shanti Bahini, which was politically, diplomatically supported by India. So India was forced to take a role up in the liberation movement because there were pressing circumstances which were essentially threatening India's interests. At that point, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had to deal with a massive refugee crisis. The border states like West Bengal, Assam, Tripura, they were receiving a huge flow of refugees. After Operation Searchlight, according to estimates, more than 10 million Bengali refugees flowed into India to save themselves from the atrocities of the Pakistani army. The Pakistani army had even enlisted private mercenaries like the Razakars to unleash deadly violence against innocent Bengali civilians. So obviously, India had a humanitarian obligation to act. India had a moral obligation, a duty to protect the brothers and sisters in East Pakistan. And it was not just the humanitarian obligation. India saw this as a strategic opportunity as well. Given that Pakistan had been nothing but problematic since 1947, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi saw that this was a critical juncture where India could exploit the internal divisions of Pakistan, probably destabilize and eventually break the country if required, so that we can at least minimize the threat. Instead of dealing with Pakistan on two fronts, dealing with one Pakistan on the west would be much more convenient. So India not only saw the strategic opportunity to get involved in this conflict, but there was a clear humanitarian moral obligation that was on the Indian government. Also, India couldn't deal with the huge burden of the refugees forever. For the mistakes of Pakistan, why should India be burdened with the massive refugee problem? And though India had a humanitarian objective to help and protect the refugees, this can't be a lasting solution. So all these factors pushed the then Indira Gandhi government to take up a direct role in what was happening in East Pakistan. So this is what led to the eventual war, the 1971 India-Pakistan war. I'm sure all of you would have heard about the overt phase of the war that happened in December 1971. But the actual war had begun much before that. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had already authorized India's research and analysis wing the Foreign Intelligence Agency, which had been recently set up in 1968, to take up a covert role in East Pakistan to try and subvert East Pakistan from within, to weaken the Pakistani hold, and to back the Bengali liberation movement. So, our objectives were very clear: to first deal with the burden of the refugees, on humanitarian grounds, help the refugees, accommodate them, but ensure that the instability does not spread, and contain the crisis by helping the liberation movement directly and through covert methods as well. India was ready to even face a full fledged war if necessary in order to break the country and cripple Pakistan into two parts. So, with this strategy in mind, India set its goals very clearly. The political objectives were very clear. It was not to occupy East Pakistan, it was to liberate the Bengalis, allow the Bengali nationalists to reassert their national identity, help the people of Bengal to form their own nation. And India wanted to play a pivotal role in this. Plus, it would be an opportunity for us to strategically weaken and break Pakistan. So, India's research and analysis wing, under the leadership of the legendary spy master R.N. Kao, would wage a secret war which till date is not acknowledged. Obviously, it was a highly classified mission where RAW would directly support the Mukti Bahini, the armed faction of the Bengali liberation movement. India would not only provide funds and training, we would supply arms and weapons and ensure that Mukti Bahini became a strong resistance force against the Pakistani army, especially the elite Special Frontiers Force, the SFF, a highly secretive unit of RAW, which handles the special operations of RAW, was responsible for setting up training camps near Chittagong and in the border areas. Primarily, the refugees were recruited and trained, given arms, supplies, and funds, and they were pushed back into East Pakistan to target Pakistani supply lines, to target the Pakistani army command centers, and to offer a strong resistance against the Pakistani army and its atrocities. So, this subversion, which was engineered by RAW, played a critical role in weakening Pakistan internally. Eventually, the stage was being set for a full fledged overt conflict, and the Indian armed forces were more than prepared for what was to come. The Indira Gandhi government not only ensured enough diplomatic support, especially amongst the global south, by highlighting Pakistan's genocidal act, we even took a stand against the Western powers, especially United States, which was a close ally of Pakistan, was even threatening India at that point. The then US President Nixon and his National Security Advisor Kissinger were openly hostile towards India with their racist bias against India. They even threatened India with consequences by pushing the US Navy, the 7th Fleet of the US Navy, into the Bay of Bengal to threaten India with possible military consequences. It was at this critical point that Prime Minister Indira Gandhi delivered a diplomatic masterstroke, where India gave up its non alignment and signed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with the Soviet Union, bringing the Soviets into play. And with Soviet backing and protection, India had the free hand to go ahead and fight an overt war against Pakistan. So in December 1971, Pakistan opened the overt front by launching attacks on Indian air bases in the Western Front. And this led to a full fledged conflict where all the three services were involved. Under the legendary leadership of Sam Moneksha, the Indian Army was more than prepared for the conflict. Same with Indian Navy and the Air Force. Very quickly, Pakistani air defense and air bases were decimated. Pakistan's ability to send reinforcements were crippled by a very effective naval blockade, and multiple Pakistani naval ships and submarines were quickly destroyed by the Indian Navy. In fact, in a legendary battle on the 4th of December, the Karachi port and harbor was set on fire, and till this day, the day is marked as the Navy Day. The Indian army very quickly ran over East Pakistan with the backing of the Mukti Bahini rebels, and within 2.5 weeks, Pakistan was brought to its knees. It was a decisive diplomatic intelligence and a military victory for India. India not only stood up against the bullying of the United States and Western powers, India had led to a decisive victory where India ensured the Pakistani forces surrendered by signing the instrument of surrender. You can see in this historic image the then Pakistani general in East Pakistan signing the instrument of surrender, accepting defeat in the war. And India held 93,000 Pakistani soldiers as POWs, giving us the leverage when we negotiated the Shimla Agreement to bring this conflict to an end. So, with this involvement of India, Bangladesh was finally free, and Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Awami League eventually came to power. So, India was very hopeful that this relationship would now succeed because we had a trusted friend and a partner who was ever grateful for India's help and assistance. So, from 1971 to 75, Under the new Awami League government, with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman as the leader, the Bangabandhu of the nation, India built very strong ties, and we started making attempts to resolve long-standing issues like the land boundary issue, the Ganga water sharing issue, the boundary related problems. One by one, these issues were being taken up and attempts were being made to address them because we had a friendly, favorable regime. But unfortunately, India's attempts were very quickly derailed because within the Bangladeshi army, there were dissidents who were still aligned with the Pakistani state, who were still loyal to Pakistan and the deep state of Pakistan. Many attempts had been made to eliminate Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and finally, Pakistan managed to succeed in its divisive plan, where it ensured the assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman at the hands of the army officials who staged a coup, toppled the Awami League regime in 1975, and almost the entire family of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and the top leadership of Awami League was wiped out. Now, this was a huge setback for India. The ones who survived would be Sheikh Hasina and her sister, who would largely grow up in India's protection. That's why Sheikh Hasina shares that close bond with India, as India not only helped in the liberation of her country, but played a pivotal role in protecting her family as well for a very long time. So, as a result, there was a quick turn of events in Bangladesh. Suddenly, we saw the end of a friendly government. We saw the elimination of a friendly leader, and we saw the rise of a hostile military regime, which would be pro Pakistan and anti India. So, this would continue from 1975 till 1990. For nearly 15 years, Bangladesh would remain under dictatorial rule. Leaders like Zia ur Rahman would come up and rule the country with the iron fist. And clearly, the government was pro Pakistan aligned, giving a space for Pakistan's covert activities against India. That is where the trouble began. That is where Bangladesh started hosting anti India elements, including in Northeast insurgent groups and terrorist organizations. Bangladeshi border became a very sensitive, delicate issue for us, not only because of infiltration of insurgents, terrorists, and criminals, but even because of the large scale illegal migration. As the country was struggling with its economic development under military rule, Bangladeshis would they would look at India as opportunity, as a place where they could secure their livelihood. And that is where India would become a dumping ground of sorts for all the illegal migrants who would enter India in large numbers, creating multiple challenges in the coming years. In fact, the insurgency of Ulfa in Assam, the Tripura insurgency, they're all rooted in the problem of illegal migration, which led to changes in demography in these states, which had socio-ethnic impact, right? And Bangladesh would derail all the projects that India was envisioning, be it collaboration with Myanmar or be it our initiatives to focus on the border regions to solve the boundary problems, the land boundary issue, for example, and the water sharing issues. All these initiatives of India were derailed. Then India was very hopeful that through Bangladesh we could connect with Northeast India in order to bypass the Siliguri corridor to create a more reliable route. And previously, the Awami League government was willing to give transit access. But now the hostile government took away the transit access as well. So we had to deal with a very hostile regime, and all these problems started emerging one by one. Then came the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, in 1991, which would be headed by Khaleda Zia, the wife of Ziaur Rahman, who has passed away just yesterday. I'm sure you guys must have read in the news that Khaleda Zia, the first woman prime minister of Bangladesh, has passed away. Right? So the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, founded by the former military dictator Zia-ur Rahman, would remain a right-wing nationalist party, which was again aligned with Pakistan. It was largely seen as pro-Pakistan and anti-India. It even gave a free space for radical jihadist elements like the Jamaat-e-Islami to flourish and thrive in the country. So from 1991 to 1996, India still had to deal with a hostile regime in Bangladesh with no improvement in the relations. Then we had a final breakthrough. In 1996, Sheikh Hasina had re entered politics and she managed to bring Awami League to power for one term from 1996 to 2001. During this short period, there was a slight improvement in the relationship. The Ganga Water Sharing Treaty was signed and gradual friendly ties were developing. But again, the BNP came back to power in 2001, continuing the anti India approach and the hostility towards India. But the final breakthrough for us was in 2009, following the constitutional crisis of 2006 to 2008. Sheikh Hasina conclusively won a mandate, and Awami League came to power with a full, complete majority. And since then, Sheikh Hasina did not lose a single election until last year, until her regime was toppled. She won back to back elections. She ensured better development, better progress in the country. And she also ensured that India's priorities and concerns were immediately addressed. From 2009 itself, Sheikh Hasina worked with the Manmohan Singh government to ensure the terror safe havens in Bangladesh were destroyed. She almost single handedly helped India to deal with Northeast insurgency and the terror base that existed in Bangladesh and ensured the security of the Northeast. Groups like ULFA and the Bodo insurgents and NSCN, these groups and their leaders were quickly brought down. Their supply of arms funds were cut off, and even these extremist leaders were handed over to India. So today, if India can negotiate with some of these Northeast insurgents and we're trying to implement a peace process, the credit goes to the then Bangladesh government under Sheikh Hasina for helping us deal with the security threats. Border security started improving. We were able to tackle the cross border crimes, including cattle smuggling and trafficking of drugs, arms, and human trafficking. So this was the golden period of India-Bangladesh relationship. In 2015, we even resolved the land boundary issue through a land boundary agreement. And India even agreed to cede a part of its territory by enacting the 100th Constitutional Amendment Act. Things were going very well for India with great investments being made in the country. India invested in strategic ports like Chittagong and Mongla. We integrated our waterway networks, and Bangladesh had given transit access to interlink our road and rail networks to create alternate routes to Northeast India. But all of this came crashing down last year when Sheikh Hasina was toppled from power following these protests that broke out, the student led protests. See, this is where you need to understand what happened in Bangladesh. How is it connected to the entire history of the country? See, Sheikh Hasina gradually started to be seen as a authoritarian leader because Sheikh Hasina was trying to crush the opposition. She was seen as a, a controlling leader who was not allowing dissent to flourish, who was targeting the political opposition like BNP and the Jamaat. But obviously, you can understand why Awami League was trying to target the opposition. There were allegations of rigged elections, allegations that elections were not free and fair, and it was also alleged that the International Crimes Tribunal that Sheikh Hasina had set up to try the war criminals of 1971 was driven by vendetta and revenge. When some of these war criminals responsible for the Bengali genocide were given the death punishment, it led to large protests by the radical factions and the Islamist and jihadist elements aligned with Jamaat, who are always pro Pakistan elements. That always represents a fundamental split in Bangladeshi society. In Bangladeshi society, you always seen this basic split, a split between the radical and the pro Pakistan elements on one side and the nationalist pro India elements on the other side. So, what began as an anti quota protest led by student leaders quickly turned into a regime change attempt. See, in Bangladesh, there was a quota system introduced by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. This was to help the children of the freedom fighters who fought for the liberation of the country in 1971. But over the decades, the quota policy had been blatantly misused. So there was a lot of anger against the quota system amongst the students. And though Sheikh Hasina had tried to get rid of the quota system, the Supreme Court had intervened and it had allowed the quota system to remain in place. So the student anger was primarily against the quota system. And when the large protest broke out, Sheikh Hasina made few controversial statements, calling the students as the children of razakars, which is seen as very derogatory in Bangladesh. And Sheikh Hasina would use large scale force to try and crush the student protests, leading to the killing of many students and civilians. So this outrage, which had already been fueled, right? It had an external involvement. There was an involvement of Pakistani state actors and other external powers, according to reports. There were attempts being made to utilize this momentum and instigate a larger widespread protest to engineer a regime change to topple Sheikh Hasina's government. So eventually, as Bangladesh got more aggressive, as Sheikh Hasina used force against the protesters, eventually it led to the toppling of her government in 2024. So this was the biggest setback for India. Sheikh Hasina fled to India, sought asylum, and given the fact that Sheikh Hasina has been a trusted friend and a partner, India has given shelter to her. But since then, the interim regime which has taken over, it has pushed the country into further chaos under Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel laureate, who's largely backed by Western countries as well, has been accused of taking an anti-India stance right from last year, right from Sheikh Hasina was toppled and removed from power. So this is the fundamental split I'm talking about, which will help you understand what's going wrong in Bangladesh. You always have a pro-India nationalist section represented by Awami League and the pro-India elements, and a pro-Pakistan radical Islamist section, which has always been against India. So this is the basic divide which explains the entire history and the problems in Bangladesh. And this is where the solutions are found for India. See, India's biggest mistake, the place where we lost the entire plot, is relying on one party, relying on one leader, like Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Sheikh Hasina, for influence. We placed all our eggs in one basket. See, in foreign policy, you need to be pragmatic and realistic. If you can engage with Taliban, if you can engage with Mohammad Muizzu's or regime in Maldives, we should look at BNP and even probably the Jamaat to try and build engagement with them, whether you like them or not, whether you like their ideology or not. That is how geopolitics works. And this is the biggest shortcoming of our policy towards Bangladesh. We have put all our eggs in one basket, relied on one party, one leader. So when there is a change in government, we end up losing the influence. We end up ceding space for the anti India elements. So this is where India should cultivate leverage, especially economic leverage. Now, the reason why Taliban is seeking out India's friendship, or Mohammad Muizzu has made a complete U turn in his hostile approach, is mainly because they realize that India can be a provider of assistance. India can be a provider of opportunities. That is exactly the leverage we need to create with Bangladesh. Even if, let's say, these elements like BNP or Jamaat were to remain dominant, or even the new age student leaders who have been making rhetorical statements against India, let's say they were to come to power, India should find a way to engage and work with them. That is exactly where we lost the plot. Now, coming to our major concerns today, the biggest concern is the targeting of minorities. The radical Islamists and jihadists, they have been trying to ensure that minorities are not given any space in Bangladesh. See, Bangladesh thrived for one reason because it was largely secular under Awami League. But these radical forces are trying to turn that around. And there have been targeted attacks against Hindus, against Christians, against Buddhists. And the imposition of the strict religious codes, the space given to radical ideologies, the thriving of Al Qaeda Islamic State represents a serious security concern, and we are worried about the overall well being of the Hindu minority community. It's not just the Hindu population, all the minorities in general. Their overall well being and protection matters to India. I'm sure you must have heard of the recent lynching of a Hindu worker, right? The mob lynching incident where he was set on fire as well. This is where Muhammad Yunus and his government have a responsibility to protect all the people, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of their identity. The other big concern for us is the growing proximity of Pakistan with Bangladesh. Ever since Muhammad Yunus regime came to power, Pakistan has been embracing Bangladesh, opening up and getting closer. For example, top generals of the army and top officers of the Navy Air Force have been visiting the country. For the first time after 1971, direct maritime sea route has been set up, linking Chittagong with Karachi. So India sees this as an emerging threat, as Pakistan could use the shipping route to even smuggle arms and weapons into India, into the northeast via Bangladesh. We have seen the presence of ISI operatives, and Pakistan is trying to build closer defense relationship through military exercises and joint partnership. So there is a flow of weapons which is being discussed from Pakistan to Bangladesh. So this embrace of Pakistan is something that worries India. The fear that Pakistan might use Bangladesh as a launch pad to try and create trouble for India in the eastern sector. The other concern is the presence of terrorist elements, which has been reported off late. Known terror elements, including this individual, Ibtisam Ilahi Zahiri, a well-known radical cleric who heads Markazi Jamiat Al Hadith, a radical outfit in Pakistan, known as a religious entity, which is seen as a guiding force for the Lashkar-e-Toiba. He is known to be very close to Hafiz Saeed, who is a UN designated terrorist. So recently, he was spotted in Bangladesh just 2 months ago, very close to the Indian border near Siliguri corridor, delivering radical speeches, trying to incite the youth to take up terrorism against India. And this is where the trouble lies for us. And it's not just Pakistan, there are other external forces at play. Turkey has been getting very close to the Mohammad Yunus regime, and it has been supplying advanced weaponry, including the Bayraktar drones, which have been deployed for surveillance against India near the strategic Siliguri corridor. As Turkey has gotten close to Pakistan, similarly, it is trying to reach out to Bangladesh, and it is this nexus which worries India. Given Turkey's hostile position, be it during Operation Sindoor or be it on the Kashmir issue, Turkey has been creating problems for India diplomatically. And by arming our neighbors like Pakistan and now Bangladesh, Turkey represents a concern and a threat as far as our strategic interests are concerned. The other major problem is the embrace by Muhammad Yunus of China and its investments. After taking office, he went to China, delivered a controversial speech saying that Bangladesh is the guardian of the oceans, that Bangladesh is the protector of Bay of Bengal, and he was inviting China to play a role in the Northeast region. This was seen as a very provocative statement. And China has stepped up its investments. It has announced a multi-billion-dollar project to redevelop the Mongla port. And it has also started developing a huge submarine base at Pekua, which is going to be one of the largest submarine bases in the region. The Bangladeshi Navy has only two submarines with it. But this yard, which is being built by China, can host eight submarines. So there is a suspicion that Chinese Navy might get access to the facility to dock its submarines, posing a direct threat to India. Then China has also announced a $1 billion funding for the Teesta River project, which has implications for West Bengal and Sikkim, which are also dependent on the Teesta waters. So the involvement of these external powers and the role they are playing is something that really concerns us. Bangladesh under Mohammad Yunus has invited China to help redevelop the Lal Monirhat Air Base, a old defunct air base near the Indian border, very close to the Siliguri corridor of India. So Chinese involvement here could potentially be a military and strategic threat. There's a possibility China could consider deploying surveillance equipment and aircrafts, which could pose a threat for us at the Siliguri corridor. So this is where experts also believe that there is a greater game which is underway in Bangladesh. There is a probable involvement of the United States, and this is what Sheikh Hasina was also indicating, that US was the one which was primarily pushing for regime change and targeting the Sheikh Hasina regime. See, we'll never know to what extent the allegations are true, but Sheikh Hasina was of the opinion. She gave a public address later saying that US had approached her for a military base at St. Martin's Island in order to counter China in the Bay of Bengal and in the Indian Ocean. But when Sheikh Hasina refused any presence of American military in the region and refused to hand over the St. Martin's Island, she was indicating that's when the trouble began. That's when the student protests broke out. And there are reports that some of these universities, which were at the forefront of the protests, were funded by few controversial American foundations, which are known to have close links with the CIA. See, whether or not these allegations are true doesn't matter. Eventually, the possible involvement of multiple foreign actors, multiple powers, which are pushing for their own interests, represents a greater game which is underway in Bangladesh. And that is where the concern lies for India. See, this map shows you where the St. Martin's Island is located. The proximity of the island to India, right, is what led Bangladesh to refuse and push back against the American demand, which allegedly was made. So probably this played a role, maybe. And the presence of Pakistan, Turkey, then China, and the radical jihadist forces, it's all in collusion that represents the challenge and threat for India. So, how did India react? What has been our response? What can we do going forward? See, initially, we downgraded the relationship with Bangladesh and we mainly took a hit at their trade. India suspended cross border trade through the land ports, and we have placed restrictions on the entry of Bangladeshi goods into India. So, this has been one of India's major response to hit the economy of Bangladesh, mainly the textile industry and other small scale industries, because they're mainly dependent on India as a market for exports. So, India has restricted a large number of Bangladeshi exports, mainly through the land route, by closing the land ports, because Bangladesh has been hostile against Indian goods which are being exported. Apart from this, there is a strong demand now from Bangladesh to extradite Sheikh Hasina, as she is facing a death penalty, which has been awarded by the International Crimes Tribunal. But India has been very clear that we will not abandon a friend. Though we have an extradition treaty, India can refuse the extradition by pointing out that the trial of Sheikh Hasina was not free and fair, right? It was clearly done with a motive to target Sheikh Hasina. In fact, her party has now banned and outlawed as a radical terror outfit. So there is no scope for free and fair process, and India can deny the extradition, and that is exactly what India is likely to do, right? Because that would set a wrong precedent. Though there is a lot of anger in Bangladesh against India for sheltering Sheikh Hasina, you can't simply abandon a trusted partner, because that would send the wrong message for other partners as well tomorrow if they have to trust India. Now, Sheikh Hasina's extradition is out of the question. But what India can do is ensure stability comes back in Bangladesh following the elections that have been announced. So in February 2026, Mohammad Yunus has announced the fresh round of elections, and that is where the new trouble has begun. Now, India's priority would be to ensure that all the players get a level and equal playing field. But attempts are being made to derail the election process and ensure Awami League doesn't even contest. So it's now a banned, outlawed organization. Then, along with that, you have these new events where young student leaders who have formed a party called NCP, the National Citizens Party, and also the Inqilab Mancha, which was at the forefront of the student protests. They have been making very provocative statements against India. Recently, one of the student leaders threatened India by publishing these controversial maps, trying to show parts of India being occupied by Pakistan and Bangladesh. So, this individual was shot by unknown gunmen, and very quickly allegations were pointed towards India with no evidence of any Indian involvement. So, this led to an outrage of anti India sentiments where Indian missions came under threat. Attempts were made to attack the Indian Assistant High Commissioner, and all media houses were targeted as well. And this is where a Hindu worker was lynched and burnt. So the concern for us right now would be the deliberate rhetoric which is being created, the deliberate violence which is being instigated. And that is where India feels worried and concerned. Be it the killing of Osman Hadi, who was the student leader who was making these statements, or the way in which Muhammad Yunus and his regime have protected these young radical leaders, the likes of Asnat Abdullah, the leader of NCP, and as well as Nahid Islam. They have been known for making controversial statements. Asnat Abdullah has said that Bangladesh should meddle in Northeast India and try and threaten Siliguri corridor, that Bangladesh should shelter anti-India insurgents and terrorists. So these statements which are being made by these leaders, they are being essentially encouraged by the interim regime under Mohammad Yunus. And the regime is failing at protecting the minorities as well. So this is where our biggest challenge lies. In fact, recently, the Parliamentary Panel on External Affairs submitted a report on India Bangla relations and pointed out that this is our biggest challenge that we are facing since 1971. So, what can India do going forward? See, going forward, one option is to cultivate the BNP. Of course, the terror and radical groups are a threat. Groups like Jamaat would remain a concern for us given its Pakistani connection. And of course, terror networks affiliated with Al Qaeda, Lashkar, and others, they remain a serious threat and they need to be tackled appropriately through counterterrorism efforts. But you need to cultivate a stake and create influence with the political factions, especially the BNP. Now that Khalida Zia has passed away, her son Tariq Rahman, who was in the UK, has come back to Bangladesh to lead the BNP for the upcoming elections. So clearly, attempts are being made to derail the elections. That explains the killing of the student leader as well. Obviously, India would have no role to play in that. These were very low-level targets for India to go after, right? India had much other priorities to look after. Uh, be it the killing of Osman Hadi and the other allegations, it's unlikely that there is any Indian covert involvement of that manner, right? Because obviously there would be a backlash, and why would India do that? It would be counterproductive. Right now, our priority is to ensure we pave the way for the elections which are coming up. But in the process, there are some priorities that India will look after. One is we will try to ensure that our missions, our diplomats, the minorities, and even women are protected. This is something India would seek to pressurize Bangladesh upon. Ensure that minorities are protected, women are protected, and our missions and diplomats should be protected. Because Bangladesh has commitments under the Vienna Convention to ensure the safety of diplomatic premises and the Indian diplomats. This is something which is of utmost concern for us. Parallelly, to seek a diplomatic outreach, we can offer to cooperate with tracing the killers of Sharif Hadi, because Bangladesh has alleged they have fled to India. If at all that is true, right, India should show the willingness to cooperate and maybe hand over the killers. But we should draw the red line that Sheikh Hasina is out of bounds. We will not extradite Sheikh Hasina. And in turn, we should create economic and strategic leverage, especially with the BNP, and hope that BNP can win the elections which is coming up. Right? If required, we need to create contacts with the Jamaat as well. We can still work with groups like Jamaat. But terror groups like, let's say, Lashkar, Huji, and the others, they are out of the question. They need to be dealt with through counter-terror efforts. But diplomatically, we need to reach out to different stakeholders, correct the mistakes of the past. Don't rely on one party, one leader. Instead, diversify your contacts and relations. And that can happen only through economic and strategic engagement. So this is what India should take up. And of course, our intelligence covert operation should continue to play the larger game where Pakistan, China, probably other players are involved, because that is something which is part and parcel of geopolitics. So it's a combined strategy and effort which is required. A diplomatic recalibration, where there's an outreach from India to normalize the relationship, pave the way for elections while ensuring our interests are met by Muhammad Yunus's regime, ensure minorities are protected, our missions are protected, ensure Sheikh Hasina is out of the discussion here, but build contacts with all the groups using our economic and strategic leverage, and step up your counter-terror covert operations aimed at terror groups and the foreign hostile elements who might be operating from Bangladesh. So, as a counter strategy, it is said India is also redeveloping some of the air bases in the region, like the Kailasahar Airport in Tripura, as a counter to Bangladesh upgradation of the Lal Monirath Air Base with China, right? Then it is also said that if China can pose a threat to India's Siliguri corridor through Bangladesh, then India also has a counter move. Bangladesh also has two such strategic narrow corridors. And Assam's chief minister was recently referring to this as to how India could probably try to cut off the Rangpur division between Hili and Mahendarganj, between West Bengal and Meghalaya, because this is a narrow corridor of just 80 kilometers. Similarly, the Chittagong region is vulnerable. There's just a corridor of 28 kilometers from Tripura to Bay of Bengal. If cut off, then Chittagong, the commercial capital, would lose touch with the political capital, Dhaka. See, I'm not saying that India should get aggressive and use military posturing, but these are reminders that Bangladesh also has a lot of weaknesses. If there are these elements threatening our Siliguri corridor, threatening Northeast India, making these statements, aligning with hostile elements from Pakistan and China, right? Then there are strategies available for India as well, right? It's not that India needs to act on it, but just a display of the intent and the capability would help in keeping these elements under check, right? That's why you see a big recalibration happening in our military strategy, a big repositioning of our military assets towards the eastern sector as well. But diplomacy is something which should be allowed to thrive. Diplomacy is something which should take forward the relationship. So, on one hand, we should recalibrate the ties with Mohammad Yunus, pave the way for elections, back parties like BNP, build contacts with Jamad, and ensure the stability and normalcy comes back. Now, as we end the session, I want you guys to take a look at the PYQs that have been asked on India Bangladesh. See, this was a prelims question on Teesta River. Please read this carefully, try to answer this, mention this in the comments. And there were mains questions on the Shabak Square protests, which represents the fundamental split in Bangladeshi society that we discussed, the divide between pro India nationalists and the pro Pakistan Islamist elements. Right? This was a question asked in 2013 based on the Shabak Square protests. There was a recent question again in the 2013 mains exam on the role India played in the liberation of Bangladesh. This was asked in post independence history, right? Not from IR. But what we studied would definitely help you answer this question as well. So I really hope the discussion has been useful. Now take up one mains practice question based on the recent events and developments. I expect you guys to use the discussion, write your answers, and please post your answers in the comment section. So, on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have liked the session, understood everything. If you did, press the like button, share your comments. What do you think is the biggest threat for us from Bangladesh? Where do you think India made a mistake? What should be our correction in our policy towards Bangladesh? Please let me know in the comments. Let's have a interesting debate on this. So this brings me to the end of the class. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.